If you're a parent of a child under 16, then it is crucial that you pay attention to today's program. I'm tackling an issue today that is so divisive, it has turned parents and teachers against each other from coast to coast. It's been branded a widespread poison in your child's classroom. So what am I talking about? Critical race theory. Virtual and studio audience, I have a question for you. Listen up. Do you understand what critical race theory means? Please use your computer or voting device to vote. 1 for yes, 2 for no. All right, it looks like 65% say no. You don't really know what it means. 35% say yes. We're going to ask the same question again at the end of the hour to see if the results change. But, in short, critical race theory is defined as the idea that racism is so entrenched in the fabric of this country's history, laws, and politics that it's impossible to eradicate it without first acknowledging that we still live in a racist society. Take a look.
From the political arena to school board meetings, the battle over critical race theory continues to heat up.
Putting critical race theory into our classrooms is taking our nation in the wrong direction.
My message to the Board of Ed, stop indoctrinating our children.
More than 20 states have introduced legislation that would limit teaching critical race theory.
Tennessee recently passed laws banning the teaching of certain concepts dealing with racism.
A state bill has been labeled as the effort to stop critical race theory from Texas classrooms.
Several states like Rhode Island and Missouri are considering bills that would stop schools from teaching more about concepts like sexism and racism.
Governor Ron DeSantis is banning the teaching of critical race theory in all Florida schools.
Telling my child or any child that they are in a permanent oppressed status in America because they are black is racist.
Well, I've invited parents from coast to coast who have polarizing opinions on this controversial system of ideas and its impact on their children to discuss this hot topic on this stage. But before we meet them, I want to welcome an academic that I have an awful lot of confidence in. He's taught critical race theory for over 13 years. You've seen him here before. It's his belief that the concerns about critical race theory have been blown out of all proportion. Please welcome Race and Equity Director at the University of Southern California, Dr. Shawn Harper. Dr. Harper, thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
You say you think it's blown all out of proportion. Why do you say that?
Critical race theory is now more than 4 decades old, right? It was established by legal scholars in the 1970s. It is really clear to me that what we're seeing right now across the nation is in response to the uprisings that we saw all around our country, right, in response to the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. You know, those murders forced a national conversation about structural and systemic racism. And I think lots of parents and uninformed Americans are conflating conversations about structural and systemic racism with critical race theory. And they're lumping it all under the umbrella of critical race theory.
Well, that to me is a very important distinction. Let me read this definition of critical race theory. Critical race theory states that U.S. social institutions, that is, the criminal justice system, education system, labor market, housing market, and healthcare system, are laced with racism embedded in laws, regulations, rules, and procedures that lead to differential outcomes by race. That's what you call critical race theory, correct?
Absolutely. And you've mentioned that I've taught CRT now for the past 13 years. All 13 of those years, my students have been graduate students.
Right.
Mostly doctoral students, right? There are more than 3.5 million teachers in the United States of America. More than 80% of them are white, and the overwhelming majority of them are white women. Is the logic flow here that there's a whole bunch of white women who are teaching fifth graders critical race theory? I don't think so. It's just not a thing. It's a boogeyman.
Yeah.
It's not real.
So this has been a distortion of labels here.
Absolutely. I think that our children absolutely deserve to know the full truth of America's racial history. That's not critical race theory, but it is good, responsible teaching. It is what our democracy deserves.
Now, I want to bring a guest with a very different view to Dr. Sean Harper. Now, he's a father of three, including a son who is a recent graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is now an Air Force aviator. So I certainly thank him for his service. I'm a big supporter of the military. Now, this father went viral back in August when he claimed racism in America would be dead today if it were not for the education system using teachings inspired by CRT to keep it on life support. Take a look.
Critical race theory has become the subject of much debate here in southern Colorado.
I am the direct descendant of the North American slave trade. I am not oppressed.
My name is Derek Wilburn. I am the married father of three. All of our kids have attended Colorado Springs public schools. I spoke out at a recent school board meeting coming out in opposition to the inclusion of critical race theory.
I check into hotels and I fly commercially and I walk into retail establishments and I order food in restaurants. I go wherever I want, whenever I want. I am treated with kindness, dignity, and respect.
I'm not a fan of critical race theory for a number of reasons. Number one, segregating society in general, let alone school children, into oppressed and oppressors is not healthy.
I can think of nothing more damaging to a society than to tell a baby born today that she has grievances against another baby born today simply because of what their ancestors may have done 2 centuries ago.
The majority of Americans who vote twice voted for a black man to be their president. We had 2 consecutive black attorneys general. This is the only nation on earth where you find an Oprah Winfrey.
Let racism die the death it deserves, and let's keep living the life of the country that we want. Thank you.
Please welcome leader of the Rocky Mountain Black Conservatives, Derek Wilburn. Derek, thank you for being here.
Appreciate it, Doc. Pleasure's all mine.
I think Dr. Harper's point that I agree with, and maybe it's a matter of semantics. His point is that critical race theory is not being taught, that is a whole other subject matter, not appropriate for K through 12. What do you say about that?
I'm in agreement with that. I do not believe it's appropriate for K through 12. Once you're at the collegiate level, you can pick and choose your classes. And you can say, look, I do or I do not want to take class X, Y, or Z. The reason that I spoke out at a school board and other members, other people around the country have, is because our K-12 school boards were considering it. That's the whole reason you show up and you present your point of view.
Okay, well, now you said something that's important, and I don't want to gloss over it, because you objected to teachings that you say were inspired by critical race theory, correct?
Correct. I fundamentally object and disagree with the notion that America is an oppressive nation to people of color. I simply don't believe it. That's not my experience. What I see is a nation of opportunity, not a nation of oppression.
Well, what is it that's being taught that you do object to?
What have you read in critical race theory?
I'm familiar with the founding work done in 1989 at the critical race.
In 1989?
2001, the Delgado and Stefanik first published critical race theory. I believe it was 2001 it came out. But will you tell me if I've got this right or wrong?
Wrong.
And later, is there a difference in your mind between teaching them history and putting a social vector with that history in terms of how you should behave with your classmates and students, particularly if they're of a different color?
Tomorrow, beware of the cart narcs.
When I do see that some lazy bones has left their card out, I turn on the wand of justice and activate the mouth siren.
You do more than just ask them to put their car back.
Is your disability lazy bonesitis?
You shame them.
Now with cart narcs, that's curbing. It's a violation. If I just go out there and say, why don't you take it back? They don't see the consequences.
You just don't know what the hell you're talking about because the evidence contradicts what you're saying.
That's tomorrow. Then, on Wednesday, Mom is a life coach but can't control her own daughter.
That is enough.
I don't know how to cope with it.
You're in over your head, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That's Wednesday.
What is it that's being taught that you do object to? Is there something specific? Is it in history? Is it in political science? Are you objecting to aspects of our history that have to do with the violation of the rights of Black Americans?
No.
Earlier. What is it that you object to?
Absolutely not. We must teach history. We should teach history, all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Certainly slavery was a blight on this nation, is a blight, and we need to make sure that all generations, current and those still coming, know exactly what happened. That's why I'm not a fan of, we had a meeting at our school board about a Confederate flag being shown in the room. A teacher brought a Confederate flag into the room, and some students got upset, and they voted on whether or not to ban it. I don't want the Confederate flag banned. I want my children to see that flag. I want them to know about the atrocities that were committed on the ground beneath it. So I don't have a problem with the teaching of history. One of the issues with CRT is, if it's coming to K-12, where's it coming from? Is this a Big Brother? Is this a top-down Federal Department of Ed curriculum? Is this locally done? Is this state-run?
So was there an actual proposal that someone was bringing to your school district to teach critical race theory specifically?
The district at which I made internet viral fire was the board voting whether or not to bring CRT in any fashion of it whatsoever into the K-12 curriculum.
Yeah, see, I'm afraid that what was likely happening there is that anything being taught about race and racism in America was being lumped into this bucket called CRT. That is, frankly, disrespectful to the intellectual genius that was Derek Bell, a tenured Black male professor at Harvard University. It's disrespectful to Kimberly Crenshaw, a brilliant Black woman who is a professor at Columbia University and UCLA Law School, who've been laboring in the trenches for decades on these very important legal concepts and principles. I think it's intellectually lazy and disrespectful to lump anything related to the teaching of race and racism and oppression in our nation into this category of CRT.
But here's your mistake. You're allowing your offense to be based upon the assumption of what the school board was voting on. When you don't know, we just don't know. Nobody is in favor of eliminating teaching history. Nobody that I know. I certainly am not. We definitely need to teach history.
Well, that's what I'm asking. What were you objecting to?
The introduction of critical race theory, as I understand it, and I believe I've got a pretty good understanding of it.
What have you read in critical race theory?
I'm familiar with the founding work done in 1989 at the Critical Race Workshop.
In 1989?
1989. Was it 2001 that Delgado and Stefanik first published critical race theory? I believe it was 2001 it came out. But will you tell me if I've got this right or wrong?
Wrong.
I haven't finished. If an underlying principle being that race is not so much founded as a biological factor attributed to different subgroups of human beings, but rather is a social construct through which blacks and people of color are or can be exploited and oppressed. Incorrect?
That's not critical race theory. That's not one of the fundamental foundational tenets of critical race theory.
Then you and many sources disagree. So tell me what is.
Well, do that after the break. When we come back, we're going to meet a Black mother who says the history books have mainly told the history of white people for centuries, and that critical race theory is a way for her descendants to have their voices and stories finally heard. And we'll learn more about that when we come back.
I believe that our system was created by and for white people, specifically white men.
I believe that in withholding information, people are doing more harm than good.
I'll be throwing it together when everyone arrives.
Throw it.
Heated debate at District 49's recent school board meeting over critical race theory and if it should or shouldn't be taught in schools.
Putting critical race theory into our classrooms is not combating racism. It's fanning the flames of what little embers are left. At the end of the day, we all want the same things. We all want better schools. We all want safer streets.
We're talking about the critical race theory, or CRT, controversy today. It's an academic concept that some people claim is long overdue in schools across America, while others claim it's a push against progress. My next guest says that CRT tells children the stories of the marginalized who have been kept out of the history books for far too long.
My name is Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am absolutely for critical race theory. I have two boys, ages 21 and 23. My son's school was academically rigorous, and so when I was helping them with their homework, I flipped to the back of the book and I was like, hey, there's a lot of stuff missing. I believe that our system was created by and for white people, specifically white men. I think the teaching of critical race theory does nothing but benefit all children. In Germany, they've studied the Holocaust, and I think their education is so much richer because of it. If you look at Asians and Pan-Pacific Islanders, the Latinx community, and Native Americans, we've all studied the history of the dominant culture, and we're okay. We need to understand critical race theory so that we have a better understanding of where we were and where we're headed. I say let people come to their own conclusions after studying this, but let it be studied. I believe that in withholding information, people are doing more harm than good.
Well, Laura, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You've been listening to everything we've been talking about.
And I want to thank you for your definition. I did not understand that critical race theory was something that was taught at the university level only. So I just want to take that label off of what I'm addressing, because
Sure.
I think that it interferes.
So what are you addressing?
So from my own personal experience, I have two sons, as you saw in the package there, and I was a very hands-on mom while they were in school, and they would be studying, you know, the kings of Prussia and Russia and all these different monarchs. And I would help them with their homework and quiz them and flip to the back of the book looking for kings that weren't white. Like, where are all the people of color in these history books? And finding none. And then so going to the administrators at my kids' school and going to the teachers and just asking, why aren't we incorporating stories about kids who look like my kids? Why aren't we talking about the accomplishments of these Black, brown, and Asian people who helped, not just helped, I mean, enslaved Africans built this country.
I'm working on a project right now about Dr. Charles Drew, and so it led me, in talking with the producer, to choose 10 Black people who have really contributed to American history. Dr. Charles Drew, who's the father of the blood bank. Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress. Claudette Colvin, at age 15, refused to sit at the back of the bus. This was before Rosa Parks. Bessie Coleman, world's first licensed Black pilot. Ethel Waters, first Black American to star in her own TV show back in 1939. Gordon Parks, first Black American on the staff of Life magazine. Alvin Ailey, globally renowned dancer and choreographer. Jane Bolin, 1939, first Black female judge in the entire country. Benjamin O. Davis Sr., first Black military general. Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler, first Black female doctor in the United States. They're not being taught about in the curriculum. Why is that happening?
Yeah, so part of it is that we don't do a good enough job of teaching teachers the truth about America's racial history. And you can't teach what you don't know. So there's that. I have enormous appreciation for history, but I also want us to teach the truth about the contemporary disadvantaging of communities of color. I want to be very thoughtful here. I don't want my people to be only seen as victims. But I do think that we are doing a disservice to our democracy when we fail to help students understand that racism is not just a historical thing. It's not just a thing of the past, but there are far too many systems and structures that continue to cyclically reproduce racially disparate outcomes among people of color on just about every metric in our nation. There's way too much evidence.
So if you're talking about in the aggregate that these things happen, I don't disagree with you. The question then becomes, do we fold that into a K-12 curriculum? And that's what we're here to discuss.
Next, we'll meet three mothers, two of whom flew from the East Coast to be here today because they say this is an issue that must be dealt with. We're going to hear from them. We'll be right back.
Putting children into boxes where they feel like they are either the oppressor or the oppressed at age 5 is wrong.
I feel that what critical race theory is doing, it's teaching racism.
When you drop your kids off at school, they're being taught something extremely radical that I would never agree to exposing my children to.
Closed captioning provided by...
Right now, we're...
Now, thousands of parents across the country are outraged because they claim teachings like CRT are filtering into their children's school courses without their consent. Now, I'm joined now by two mothers, one white, one black, who share the same belief that critical race theory is poisoning classrooms and the minds of their children. Now, here's what Tiffany and Keisha have to say.
My name is Tiffany Justice, and I am the mother of 4 school-aged children. I am very concerned about critical race theory being taught in schools. Putting children into boxes where they feel like they are either the oppressor or the oppressed at age 5 is wrong. I believe that there is no place for discrimination in America's public school classrooms. Children don't see race.
My name is Keisha King. I'm a mother of 2 daughters, 13 and 14, and I am strongly against critical race theory being taught in K through 12. It is teaching that we are to judge people on the basis of their skin color. I feel that what critical race theory is doing, it's teaching racism. We should be trying to eradicate all instances where people are judged by their skin color and not by who they are.
I think it's really important for moms to come together and talk about what's happening in our classrooms. Last year, I helped to start an organization, Moms for Liberty.
It's about empowering parents to be the watchdogs of their district.
Divisive ideology of critical race theory, it distracts children from the learning that should be happening in the classroom.
Who better to say what is best for their kid than parents?
Well, Amy is a mom of 4 children, ages 7 to 17, and says critical race theory does not belong in her child's classroom, and it's wrong to teach young people that white people are inherently evil and racist based on skin color. Let's hear from her.
My name is Amy Henry, and I'm a mom of 4. I am against critical race theory because I feel like it is abusive towards our children. Critical race theory is designed to divide our children and create hate. When you drop your kids off at school, they're being taught something extremely radical that I would never agree to exposing my children to. I thought my kids were being taught math, science, reading, but then critical race theory has weaved its way into our classrooms. A lot of parents do not understand the difference between equality and equity. Equality means we have equal opportunity, and that's what America stands for. Equity means there's equal outcome. Equal outcome means socialism. Dr. Martin Luther King said, the color of your skin shouldn't matter. It's the character, who you are. Critical race theory is the exact opposite of what Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement fought for.
Joining me on stage are Keisha and Amy, and also joining me virtually is Tiffany, the founder of parental rights group Moms for Liberty. You've been listening to our conversation. What do you have to add? I'll start with you.
Sure. So the first tenet in Richard Delgado's book of critical race theory is that America is intrinsically racist and it cannot be undone. And so maybe the way that the teachers are interpreting it is certainly breaking children down into different identity groups. And it is. It's certainly being taught to these children through a very racial lens, that there is something different between my child and a white child, just by the basis of them being black or white. And that is a problem. That is racism.
I'm a person who lives and work in the land of evidence. There's way too much evidence that there are outcome inequities. It's just, it's a fact.
It may be a fact that there are different outcomes, but that is not evidence that it is because of racism. There are many different reasons why someone can work ethic. If the black person comes in at 6 o'clock and doesn't leave till 7, and the other person, you know, barely shows up to work, and the black person gets promoted, is that evidence of racism? No.
Are you suggesting then that when we look at employment and promotion outcomes in the workplace, that all of these black people are in the lowest level, lowest compensated roles because they're lazy?
No. What you're saying almost implies that we don't work hard. Is that there are many...
Wait.
No.
What did I say? I didn't say that.
No, you are saying that there are all these instances where black people are not being promoted and advancing. There are many instances. We're sitting on this very show because of a billionaire black woman. We have contributed amazing things to this country. So to be summed up in an idea, with an idea that we don't contribute and that we are victims, is a lie.
I want Amy to say what you want to say, and then I want to hear from Tiffany. Amy, go ahead.
I mean, I think this has to do with, are we creating an environment in schools for our children where we are pitting them against each other based on the color of their skin? And that's what critical race theory is going to do. Is if we were in school together, they would teach me that I'm inherently racist. I don't know I'm racist. No, wait, let me finish. Okay. And that I have been oppressing her. It's creating a box for people based on skin color and saying, okay, because you're black, you are a victim, and because you're white,
I'm so confused because
you are oppressing.
Just let me ask this.
Sure,
I'm really confused because it's not being taught in K through 12 schools.
No. It's
not being taught in K through 12 because it's not. It's only taught at the university level.
How do you
know? And let me ask.
It's not being taught anywhere in the country. In
okay, Tiffany, I haven't forgotten you. I'm coming to you next. Hang on.
It is being taught.
Okay, Tiffany, I'm very anxious to hear from you.
When your guests are saying that critical race theory is not being taught, I would say that's correct. We're seeing that social and emotional learning and diversity, equity, inclusion are the vehicles with which CRT is being brought into America's public school classrooms. As far as Mr. Harper's concerned, there were third graders in Cupertino in an elementary school that were asked to deconstruct their racial identities and then rank themselves based on their power and privilege. The Santa Clara County Office of Education denounced the United States as a parasitic system based on the invasion of white male settlers. And they encouraged their teachers to cash in on kids' inherent empathy in order to recruit them into political activism. So I think what America's parents are saying is, before you activate our children to social justice warriors, can we teach them how to read?
We're going to meet a teacher and a mother who say parents like Keisha, Amy, and Tiffany need to realize that white privilege exists and racial history needs to be taught in the schools after the break.
There's a real misconception about what critical race theory is and how it's being taught in our schools. I support critical race theory being taught to older students in high school.
I'm a white woman in a middle-class community. I don't feel only a sense of responsibility to my son. I feel a sense of responsibility to his black and brown friends.
Closed captioning provided by...
At Moms for Liberty, we work very hard to empower parents to advocate effectively for their children. Unfortunately, I have seen the darker side of this issue. I have received things in the mail that have been, quite honestly, disgusting. Things have been said to me and my children that I wouldn't want to repeat on national television. We need to get past this as a country.
Well, I'm talking to parents from around the country on either side of one of the most divisive topics in recent years, the belief that critical race theory is being implemented one way or another in grades K through 12 without parental consent. Now, joining me now is Taylor, a teacher who says many parents misunderstand what CRT is about. I'm also joined by Sarah, who believes her 8-year-old son should learn about racism in school because it will help him become more compassionate.
My name is Sarah Dean, and I am a mom from Seattle, Washington. I have an 8-year-old son. Here's what I know about raising an 8-year-old white son. He was born in America as a white male. It doesn't get better than that in terms of opportunity. I, as a mom, feel a huge sense of responsibility as a white woman to make sure that he's in an education system that teaches him what has happened in our country over the course of hundreds of years. I'm a white woman in a middle-class community. I don't feel only a sense of responsibility to my son. I feel a sense of responsibility to his black and brown friends.
My name is Taylor, and I'm an educator in Texas. There is a real misconception about what critical race theory is and how it's being taught in our schools. I think a lot of educators are being criticized with people thinking that we're teaching white privilege in kindergarten classrooms, and that's just not happening. I support critical race theory being taught to older students in high school. As students get older, a lot of the truths of how our nation was founded come to light in history classes. Then teachers can have developmentally appropriate conversations with these students. I think a lot of people think if we don't talk about racism, that it'll just go away. Let's be honest. Racism is deeply rooted in our nation's history, and it needs to be discussed.
Taylor, you believe our kids need to know the whole story.
I do agree. We're raising global citizens here, okay? That's what we do as teachers and as educators. We prepare students for a diverse world.
Is there a difference in your mind between teaching them history and putting a social vector with that history? And by that I mean some parents object to the fact of saying, okay, here's what happened, and then this is what that means for you now socially in terms of where your compass should point, what your conscience should tell you to do, how you should act, interact, and behave with your classmates and students, particularly if they're of a different color.
Teachers should teach the curriculum that's provided by their state, regardless of their personal beliefs, so that students can make their own decisions about those factors that you mentioned at the end of your question.
What are your thoughts on this?
So I really appreciate what Taylor said about raising global citizens. And so if I'm looking at this through the lens of how do I raise this child who's a global citizen in a way that he can be conscientious of our history, then I have to look at how am I raising a child that can be a critical thinker. And when it comes down to critical race theory in school, we're looking at teaching our children how to be critical thinkers and how to interpret data and research and history in order to then take that into leadership across all organizations and across the globe.
Yeah, because we're raising adults, not children.
Exactly. Right.
Next, we're going to meet a stepdad of two who says critical race theory is nothing more than racial Marxism. What does he mean by that? He kind of echoing some of what Derek is saying. We'll find out right after the break.
I would summarize critical race theory as race Marxism. If I could wave a magic wand, critical race theory should be rendered a historical artifact.
Do you feel like you know the biggest enabler? Well, I've devoted the past hour to hearing the very real concerns from parents who believe critical race theory is wreaking havoc in one of the most sacred places, their children's classrooms. Now, my next guest feels so strongly about this topic, he's writing a book about it.
My name is James, and I'm strongly against critical race theory being taught in schools. I would summarize critical race theory as race Marxism. I believe that critical race theory is a movement of activists and scholars. The other side has a belief system that misunderstands how the world works. They believe there are oppressor classes with access to whiteness and the oppressed excluded from whiteness. It is a theory rooted in political power. I think critical race theory could hinder a child's education. If I could wave a magic wand, critical race theory should be rendered a historical artifact.
Please welcome co-author of book Cynical Theories, James Lindsay. James, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Phil.
You say this should be an artifact. We should just put this behind us
I do not believe the critical race theory tenet that says that racism is the ordinary state of affairs in our society, and if we don't dredge up a race consciousness, that we can't get over it. I think this is actually a lie. It's very annoying to me to listen to the back and forth here. In fact, I'm glad to be here to bring some knowledge. I take a lot of umbrage with the idea that we're going to talk about should we have critical race theory, this or that, because it's talking about racism or history, when the fact of the matter is it's not are we, it's how are we. And I am shocked and appalled to hear the defensive side for critical race theory misrepresent it this way. But they don't explain, for example, why the first paper called Toward a Critical Race Theory of Education by Gloria Ladson-Billings was published in 1995. They don't explain why Richard Delgado's 2001 book explains on page 5, for example, that it rapidly spread from law to other disciplines, especially education. They don't explain also in the exact same situation that Gloria Ladson-Billings is one of the chief authors of a ed equity in Virginia that's bringing critical race theory into all of the state schools of Virginia right now.
You must breathe through your ears because
I have read the vast majority of the major works in critical race theory that have been published since 1970 to the most recent things, including, for example, in 2017, we have Allison Bailey writing a paper for Hypatia, an education paper, and she says that there's the critical thinking tradition, but what we're doing in critical pedagogy, which critical race theory is an integrated part of, is from a different set of tradition called critical theory, which is neo-Marxism, which is interested in studying the relationships of power rather than epistemic adequacy. You can look the paper up. It's called Tracking Privilege Preserving Epistemic Pushback in Critical Race and Feminist Philosophy Classrooms.
That's not being taught in K-12 schools. Sorry.
It just
isn't. I mean,
congratulations.
like, I wish I could get my students to read as much as you do. I wish. Whoa.
Parenting behavior. I want to hear from you right away. Either log on to drphil.com and click Be on the Show, or text Phil to 88500. In the beginning, I asked you if you thought you knew what critical race theory meant. 35% of you said yes, 65% of you said no, and now it's time to take another poll. So pick up your device and we'll see, do you have a better understanding of critical race theory or not? 1 for yes, 2 for no. Enter your votes. Okay, 65 yes and 35 no. So
That's a good outcome.
I think we've had a very civil and dignified discussion and exchange here.
Yes.
And I certainly learned some things today from everyone. I appreciate everybody's points of view here. As adults, we write on the slate of who our children are. And our teachers are with our children 40% of their waking hours. So that's really important, what they're saying to our children. And as parents, we should pay attention to that and have our voices heard about what's being said. And I would suggest this: if you do have opinions about this one way or the other, don't run up the stairs at your school with your hair on fire hysterically. Go in and ask and find out what's being taught. And if somebody says, CRT or whatever, find out what they mean by that. Look at the curriculum, see what is actually being taught, and respond to the actual substance of what's being taught. You have a right to weigh in. And we ran way over today, and I'm going to put what doesn't make it in the show today on the website. Dr. Harper, thank you for bringing some clarity to this. For more information about today's episode, or if you'd like to be on the show, log on to drphil.com. You know where to find me on the social platforms. On Facebook, I have a private Facebook group called Dr. Phil Fanatics. That's PHAN. I'm going to post all of this there as well. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast, Fill in the Blanks. This is a new year and a new you. Listen in and find out strategies to help you live your best life. You don't want to miss it. Check out Robin's podcast, I've Got a Secret with Robin McGraw, with Stacey London of TLC's what not to wear and breaks down every uncomfortable, difficult, and liberating aspect of menopause that nobody else wants to talk about. And Robin explains why it just might be the start of the best stage of your life. Check it out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll see you next time. Be safe. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys.
Memories can kill ya, but I didn't hear ya. I thought that I could fly, but woke up on the asphalt. I swear there was still a storm. I've always been naive, call it.
Every day and night, that's right. Ooh, you know we gon'